Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to my romance era. Of course, it's going to start raining outside right when I start filming this video. Hopefully you can't hear that. But anyway, I wanted to do a reading vlog because I am kind of feeling romance right now. I don't know what it is, but there have been many romances coming out recently that I have just been gravitating towards. I've been collecting them physically and adding them to my physical TBR, even though in the past I haven't been that much of a romance reader. I've always said if I do like a romance, I like emotional, hard-hitting romances. I really don't like light and fluffy. I also really don't like smut. So most mainstream, traditionally published romances just don't quite work for me. It don't appeal to me, and usually I don't feel like I'm even really missing out on anything. But again, recently that has changed. So I am going to take this next week of my life and just fully immerse myself into the romance genre. I'm ready to have happy feelings and fall in love with couples falling in love, and we will see if this turns me into a long-term romance stan or if this is just like a fleeting summer moment. So let's talk about the romances that I want to read throughout the next week-ish. First of all, two romances that I have seen everywhere this summer. It feels like everybody has been reading both of these books. It is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, which actually was not published this year. This was published in 2018. It's an older book, but it did just recently get a cover redesign, and I think that has reinvigorated a lot of people to pick it back up. Me included. I definitely am a huge fan of this cover and was much more inclined to pick it up physically because I love it so much. And then Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. This is a new release, and the reason I put these up together is because I hear they have very similar plot lines. I believe these are both about childhood friends who are either just friends as children or develop some kind of like young adult relationship, and then something drives them apart for many years, and then now we are following them as adults when something brings them back together. As far as romance tropes go, I think this is one of my favorites. I do like when characters have a deeper backstory with each other and have more history. So the childhood friends to lovers or second chance romance type tropes I usually enjoy. It might be a bad idea to read these both in the same week because they are so similar. I've actually heard that this one is like basically the exact same as this one. So I might be doing myself a disservice, but I'm just too curious to not read them both. Then to get into some more hard-hitting emotional romances, one I absolutely want to get to is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. I don't know really anything about the plot. All I know is that people are loving this book and it is like breaking their hearts. It's emotional. And shout out to Naomi from Naomi's Library for sending me her copy of this book. This is an art copy that she had and she sent it to me. So that is extremely nice, and I'm so glad that now I get to include this in this reading vlog. Speaking of emotional books that may or may not tear me apart, the next romance I want to read is You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. This one sounds like a heart-wrencher. It is about a girl who loses her boyfriend. He passes away and she is obviously grieving him, and she constantly calls his cell phone in order to hear his voicemail message, to hear his voice. And I guess one day he picks up the phone and answers it. So I have no idea what this is in terms of like, is it actually a romance or is it just like a saying goodbye type book about two people who were in love? Does she move on and find someone else, or does this weird like magical thing make it possible for them to be together? I have no idea. All I know is that sounds like a very sad setup. So I'm hoping that this book also has some like heartwarming, hopeful moments in it too, but probably going to be destroyed reading that one. The last physical book I want to get to this week is Magic Hour by Chris and Hannah. Don't know anything about the plot of this one. All I know is that it is listed as a romance on Goodreads. Most of Chris and Hannah's books are basic, like straightforward historical fiction, but it appears that this one has a romantic romance undertone, so I decided to pick it up and continue working my way through her backlist. And then the last book that I want to read this week is an audiobook that I have. It's called Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. I've actually already started listening to this one. I have this through Libro FM, just the audiobook version. And why I am particularly interested in this is, first of all, Julia Whalen is a very well-known audiobook narrator. She's narrated a number of Chris and Hannah books, Emily Henry books, Taylor Jenkins Reid books, a lot of big name titles. She's very good at what she does. And she wrote this book about an audiobook narrator going through a romance. And again, since I've already started this one, I can talk a little bit about my thoughts. I am only about 35% of the way through and I'm really enjoying it. I am loving the behind the scenes look at what it's like to be an audiobook narrator. This main character was an actress and something happened to take her away from pursuing that as her career. She got into narrating audiobooks, and it's very interesting hearing about how she's treated as an audiobook narrator. Like in some circles, she is very highly respected. She's winning awards because she, like Julia Whalen, is like a big name narrator. And so readers, authors, whatever, know who she is and really respect her. But the people who aren't in the audiobook world really don't get it. And they don't understand that like it's a form of acting. It does take a ton of time and preparation and work and effort. And so I'm just loving all of that type of commentary. And again, the inside look about what it's really like being a narrator. The romance is slowly turning up, but it's a little bit slower burn than I was maybe expecting. So I like that and I'm excited to keep reading. So those are all the books I want to read this week. 6 books in 7-ish days is kind of a lot for me, so I don't know if I will finish every single one of them, but I'm going to do my best. So that's that. I'm going to get back to listening to my audiobook. Hopefully I can finish that within the next day or so. One thing I also wanted to do in this video, if I am hopefully listening to a lot of audiobooks, I would like to do a puzzle. And I just got this really adorable puzzle from Emily Cromwell Designs on Instagram. She makes bookish bookmarks and art, and she just designed and started selling this puzzle for the first time, so I had to pre-order it and I cannot wait to put it together. And I feel like the colors in this are just very romance inducing with this adorable little bookshop. So that's gonna be the plan today. Listen to an audiobook, work on a puzzle. I will be back probably once I've finished. Thank you for listening so I can tell you my overall thoughts, and then of course we will just go from there. Okay, good news. I finished Thank You for Listening today, and better news is I really enjoyed it. It was definitely what I would consider a light and fluffy romance. That's not to say that there weren't serious elements, because our main character does have a physical disability that she is struggling to overcome with her self-esteem and like allowing herself to move on from what caused it and everything like that, as well as she is working through caring for an elderly family member. So both of those things I thought brought a little bit of emotion to the story, but overall it was still like a light, fluffy, happy romance. I was never near tears or anything like that, but I still really liked it. I thought there was quite a bit of humor in the story, and like the banter between the two main characters was really good. There were moments where I laughed out loud, which doesn't always happen. I would compare the humor to like Emily Henry's books, because I find her banter to be really good in books, and I know other people do too. So that is a big plus. Another plus is it was not too smutty at all. Actually, the dirtiest parts of the book were when the two main characters were discussing the romance book that they were narrating together, and they were talking about like pronunciation of certain words. That's the only time like dirty words were used, and it was in a humorous context. So I really liked all that. It was really good for me. If you're looking for something smuttier, probably not gonna be this book. This book does have, I don't know if you'd call it like a mistaken identity trope, where like these two main characters are talking to each other, but they don't know that the other person is who they think they are. Kind of hard to explain that without saying exactly what happens, but I don't want to tell everything about the plot. I thought it was funny, but I can see how people would read that and be like, come on. Like either it's way too obvious who that other person is, or like red flags that these people are lying to the other person. I can see how that could be some people's not their thing, but I didn't mind it. So overall, I'm gonna give this book a 4. I definitely want to go back and read Julia Whelan's first novel. There was also a really good author's note at the end of this book talking specifically about Julia Whelan's books and how they have been interpreted as either memoirs or like autobiographies. And that she's kind of writing herself in her characters, which in this one seems like an obvious comparison to make because it is in the audiobook industry, but she was making it clear that while she draws inspiration from her own life and her career, the book is still very much fictional, and same with her first book. It came off as autobiographical, and that's caused a lot of confusion even amongst like her friends and stuff. I just thought that was a really interesting point to put into her author's note, so I enjoyed that little glimpse into Julia Whelan's life and how she writes her books and everything. So overall 4 stars. Overall, still a big Julia Whelan fan, and I'm ready to keep this romance train going. I have just barely started Love in Other Words. I figured if I'm going to read this one and Every Summer After within the same week, I might as well try to spread them out, read one, read at least one book in between, and then read the other one. So this one, so far, I haven't gotten very far into it, but it definitely has much more of an emotional tone right off the bat. We are following a main character who, when she was like a teenager, her mom passed away, and her mom had left a message for her and her father to, whenever life like becomes too stressful, go on a vacation together. And the dad takes that to mean buy a vacation home. I think it's like a lake home. So they do that, and when they get there, there's this next door neighbor that our main character is really connecting with. They're teenagers, and then we're also following her as an adult. She is a doctor or a pediatrics resident. So she's very career focused right now. She is with another guy. Then all of a sudden at like a coffee shop, she sees that guy from her teenage years. And he approaches her. He's like, I still love you. So now she's like, what the heck? So I'm interested to see where else this goes. I do think I know a spoiler for this book. I think that I watched a video in the past, and I probably didn't think I was ever going to read this book, so I stayed tuned for the spoilers. And so I think I know what the major conflict is, or what's going to drive away the two characters when they're teenagers, but I don't think that is going to negatively affect my reading experience. So I'm ready to just get back into it. This one is on Scribd, so I'm going to be listening to the audiobook whenever I have time, hoping to remain satisfied with all of these romance books, but I will be back when I'm either further or finished and can give you some more thoughts. You guys, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that I have finished 2 things since my last check-in. One of those is this adorable puzzle, which I completed last night thanks to my husband, and I love it. I love everything about it, and I cannot wait for Emily Cromwell to make more puzzles because I will definitely purchase them and do them. That was super fun. And I also finished Love in Other Words. I listened to the audiobook most of last night and only had like another hour to finish this morning. So I just finished it. Bad news is I have very strong negative feelings about how that book just ended. Oh man, you guys, I was really liking this. I really like, again, the childhood friends to lovers trope. I like when there's history between 2 characters in a romance. I, for some reason, really gravitate towards like the first love kind of yearning and like the connection that you can have as teenagers, and I completely validate that and think that it's, you know, real and strong and can make up for a lot of mistakes. And for most of this book, first of all, like I said, I thought I knew what the conflict was. I thought I had been spoiled on what happened. I didn't. That was not at all what had happened. So I don't know where I got that idea from, but what actually happened was completely different. And I wish what I thought was going to happen was what happened, because I really hated what actually happened in this book. And I feel like I have to spoil a little bit in order to talk about my thoughts. But real quick to wrap up the non-spoiler thoughts, I just don't think I could get past what happened in the past, and not only what actually happened, but how they talked about what happened and like the explanation for why it happened, I don't think is good enough. So let's just talk about what happened. For those of you who have also read it, or if you never plan on reading it, I will put up the word spoilers as I'm talking about spoilers. So in case you need a recap, what happened in this book is on New Year's one year, they were in separate places. The girl was with her dad at like a party, and then the guy, Elliot, was at a friend's house for a New Year's party. And I guess there had always been this like lingering question about whether Elliot had a history with this girl named Emma, who our main character Macy was always kind of jealous of, wary of, whatever. And apparently on this night, Elliot called Macy and was like, I love you, we should get married. He was very drunk, and she didn't really respond correctly because they were like 17. So obviously she wasn't going to say yes to a proposal over the phone when he was super drunk on New Year's. So he was hurt or something, continued to get drunk at this party, and he ended up sleeping with that Emma girl. And then Macy knew that she had kind of hurt him, so she drove to where he was, found them in bed together, obviously got mad, and went on her own little spiral. And her dad came, picked her up, and on their drive home got into an accident and he died, which is like major trauma. And so I think her entire response to that entire situation is totally valid. And most of this book I was thinking like, girl, what are you doing? Like, make a decision. Now knowing that trauma, I can understand her decisions might be erratic. Her now as an adult and as a doctor, I would still expect maybe a little bit more maturity, but I can understand her side. Elliot though, most of the book I actually really liked Elliot because he was kind of, you know, the quiet nerdy guy. He's maybe not as smooth, doesn't know social norms or whatever, and I kind of relate to that, so I liked him a lot. But then when I found out that his explanation to her for that night was that he got so drunk that when Emma came into the room and started doing things to him, he thought it was her, he thought it was Macy, and then Macy heard that and was like, yeah, that checks out. What? In no world, in my opinion, is that a good enough excuse for what happened. I do not care how drunk you are. I don't care what you think you saw. That does not excuse that whole night worth of actions in a 5-minute conversation. And then continuing on that conversation where they're clearing the air about what happened, Macy told Elliot about what happened to her dad in that car accident, which he somehow never found out about. Then he was so shocked by what happened, reasonably enough, because it's a shocking situation. But then she had to spend the whole rest of the conversation consoling him for this whole thing that was caused by him. And I know you can't say that like he caused the accident. Of course he didn't. But he still made a huge mistake. I would argue multiple mistakes that night. And I don't feel like he took any responsibility for it or actually spent the time feeling guilty that he needed to spend feeling guilty. I don't know, man. That was not the ending I was expecting, and I just don't know if I understand why so many people have rated this book 5 stars. And I truly do not mean that to insult anybody who rated this book 5 stars. I know that romance is so personal to people, and there has to be a conflict in a romance, and everybody has different responses to what they are okay with and what they're not okay with in a relationship. And there definitely are things that people could do that I would be like, yeah, that's honestly not that big of a deal, I could get over it, that other people wouldn't be able to. So I know that's personal, I get it. But to me, this is just not forgivable. No amount of childhood history could make me get over that in 5 minutes. So I think I'm gonna give this 2 stars. And this is gonna be like one of the lowest ratings of all my friends on Goodreads. I think I saw Gabby gave this 2 stars, and that's it. Pretty much all of the rest of my friends gave it 4 or 5, maybe a couple 3s, but like no other 2s. What a bummer. I really thought I was gonna like that book. That was actually the one I was most confident about out of all of the romance books that I'm planning on reading this week. So now I'm like, where do I go from here? What do I do? So I have 4 books left on my TBR for the week. Now I'm more worried about Every Summer After because I'm wondering how identical it's gonna be. Is the conflict and the past situation going to be similar, or is it going to be different? In which case I'm going to like the first 75% of the book the same as Love in Other Words, and then also like the reveal. I'm hoping that's what happens with that one and I like it more, but I still think I want a break in between those two books. So now I'm wondering which of these 3 books to pick up. I'm kind of leaning towards You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. Not really sure why. I'm kind of intimidated by this book. Oh wow, this is about a woman whose love of her life was killed in an accident, and so now she's starting over. That sounds very emotional, just like You've Reached Sam. So maybe I should read this one. And then I should read Every Summer After. And then I should read You've Reached Sam, because these 2 are similar, so I want a book in between there. And then if I get to it, I can still get to the Chris and Hannah at the very end, because I know absolutely nothing about this one. All right, that's gonna be the plan for now. I'm gonna go ahead and get started on You Made a Fool of Death. I will be back once I'm a little bit into it and I can give some initial thoughts. Hopefully it goes better than that last one, but man, so far this has already been shocking. In terms of results, I was not expecting to really like the first one and really dislike the second one. So we'll see where we go from here. I'll be back with an update when I have it. I just finished You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, and I did intend to check in before I finished the book to give like an introductory update on what the book's about and how I was feeling about it. But this book was a complete roller coaster, and I felt like at any point if I had updated, my feelings would change just a couple pages later, because that's what it did basically from page 1. So I was like, you know what, I'll just finish the book and then I can tell you all of my thoughts all at once and not like change my mind or my understanding of the book or anything like that. This book is completely different than what I was expecting. First of all, the tone of it. I was expecting it to be very serious and emotional and like cut right to the heart and like literary almost, and I was expecting the writing to be more at the forefront, more so than the plot, and maybe for the plot to be a little bit abstract. I don't really know why I thought that. The only book by this author that I've read before is The Death of Vivek Oji, which I remember being a little bit literary, but there was still a plot, and I think this author's other books just strike me as like abstract and higher thinking type books, if that makes sense. And I don't mean that to insult this book, because now I'm going to say it's the opposite of all of that. It was just very different than I was expecting. The tone of this book is way more wild, messy, and fun than I was expecting. And the plot is all over the place. And I don't know how much is a spoiler to say about it, so all that I will tell you is that this is following our main character named Faye, whose husband passed away 5 years ago. They had just gotten married less than a year before that. They were in love. He passed away in a car accident, and so she has obviously been grieving his death and getting over that over the past 5 years. And now she's in a place where she's ready to kind of move on with her life. She's got a best friend encouraging her to get out there, start dating other guys, all of this stuff. And she goes for it. She goes out there. And multiple times the person you think is gonna be the person that she sticks with, it changes. So it's very different than a lot of romances I've read, because usually in a romance, like your main character will meet one person and that will be the person that they strike up an immediate connection with, and it's like love at first sight, or maybe it's hate at first sight, but clearly there's something there that pulls them together and, you know, they never veer course. This one veered course many times. And so I liked that it kept me on my toes. That was very fun and unexpected. I will say though that this book is very vulgar and just very extreme. Everything from like the intimate scenes, very steamy in my opinion, but also the fight scenes, the argument scenes, those are extremely fiery and passionate. The number of times the F word is said in here is a lot, and I don't think any of that is necessarily inherently bad or anything. It's just very different from other romances that I've read, and I don't think it's quite my personal tastes. But I do see why people are rating this 5 stars and calling it their favorite book of the year so far, because it is just so much. Like, it makes you feel so much, and if you like it, you're going to love it because it goes all in. There were a couple scenes in here where our main character is telling somebody else off, and I was just like, go girl. Like, it's really fun, you know, to read about a main character who is just saying everything that's been pent up in their mind, not holding back, not caring what feelings they hurt, and especially this main character who has a lot of pent up emotions and a lot of reasons to be angry at the world and at what people say to her. So yeah, because this book is so much, I don't think I can give it 5 stars. Like, it's just not there for me. It's not my perfect book. I think I might give it 4 stars. I think it's still below Thank You for Listening for my overall enjoyment, but I respect this book for what it is. I think it's completely original. I definitely think there are a lot of people who will not like it for all of those reasons that I talked about, but that was a good reading experience. And the audiobook of this book is narrated by Bonnie Turpin. It is on Scrib. That's where I listened to it. Bonnie Turpin is another very well-known and very talented audiobook narrator. She's narrated Angie Thomas's books, which is where I know I've heard her before. It looks like she's also narrated The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Byron, Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi, The Help by Catherine Stockett, and literally 21 additional pages of audiobooks. So she's great. The audiobook is very well done. If you don't have a physical copy and want to pick it up, I would recommend it. So not a bad way to continue on my romance journey. I'm still feeling it, you guys. I don't even feel burnt out yet, which I feel like is pretty good. And I think it's because the 3 romances I've read so far have been very different in tone and plot and my enjoyment, but I think I'm ready for Every Summer After. I know it's gonna be similar to Love in Other Words, but I am ready to keep an open mind, form my own opinion about it. I'm hoping it's different enough that I really enjoy this one more. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? Okay, you guys. I have so much to catch you up on. It is Sunday night, late. So it's been like at least 2 full days since I last talked to you, and I have actually completely finished, not 1, but 2 books. So sorry about that. I usually like to give like an intro update once I'm 50 to 100 pages into a book, and then a final thoughts update, so that my vlogs are a little bit more than just a wrap up and I can give some like preliminary thoughts before I know the whole rest of the story. But I'm so sorry that that didn't happen. Weekends at my house are by far the craziest time, just because my kids are home and my husband's home, and we usually have a lot of like projects and things we want to be working on. So I don't usually get a lot of quiet time to update a camera. So I just have to catch up on all of it now and hopefully tell you like what I was thinking at the beginning of these books, and of course my final thoughts. So first things first, Every Summer After I read really quickly. I flew through this book and loved the beginning of it. I loved the setup of childhood friends to lovers. Yes, this has a very similar setup to Love in Other Words in that it's about a girl whose family buys a lake house and it's next to this family that has a boy her age. So they get to know each other really well over the summers, over weekends sometimes, and holidays. They form a really special bond and relationship, and then something happens to cause them to have a falling out, and then something else causes them to come back together as adults. Yes, it's very similar, but it's also not a completely original concept. Like, how many movies are there with almost the same exact setup? How many of us have daydreamed about pretty much that exact scenario happening in our own lives? I know I definitely have, so I can't really blame multiple authors for writing a book about it. And I feel like the specifics of the book in terms of like what they do during their summers and their family situations are different enough that it's not a knockoff of that book. I've seen some reviews that are saying this is a knockoff version of Love in Other Words, and I highly disagree, but we will get there. So loved the setup, and I wanted to update this vlog at like the 200 page mark and just get my thoughts out there, say I was loving it, because I was really worried that the ending again would completely ruin it for me. Good news, it didn't. I can't really say that I loved like the reason for their falling out. It was a major mistake, but I at least liked that it was acknowledged as a mistake and the person who did it took ownership of that. They were able to talk it out and get through it in their own way, and at least it was addressed. I really felt like in Love in Other Words, it was just excused as like a non-mistake or like a misunderstanding, and that would not have been okay with me. So the resolution of that mistake I felt a lot better about in this book, and so overall I just had a great time. I think this is the absolute perfect summer read. I also have seen reviews about this book that people read it going in expecting an adult romance, and they don't like that most of the book is spent in the past with these characters as teenagers. I totally understand that, and I feel like that should be part of the marketing of this book, is saying it's a childhood friends to lovers romance, so you spend a lot of time with them as teenagers, and so they behave as teenagers, etc. I don't really have a problem with that because I don't mind young adult books in general. I don't mind young adult romances, and I actually really like the fun and kind of innocence that comes from a romance around that time in characters' lives. So I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. It was not life-changing to me. I don't know, there's something holding me back from the 5-star rating, but I do think it's my favorite romance that I've read so far in this video, so I would put it slightly above Thank You for Listening, and I totally get and agree with all of the hype that this book is getting. Then I dove right into You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. Again, I wasn't sure about this one because I wasn't sure if it's actually a romance, although it does say that on Goodreads under its genres. The initial premise had me skeptical, and I will say right off the bat, I would not personally consider this a romance. This follows our main character named Julie, who is a senior in high school when her boyfriend suddenly dies. He was in an accident, so it was unexpected, and this book starts out only a week after his death, and she is having a tough time, she's grieving, and she calls his cell phone just to try and hear like his voicemail message one last time, and he picks up the phone. She of course at first can't believe it. She's like, this isn't real, how is this possible? But over time comes to understand that she has the ability to talk with Sam over her cell phone, and that's that. The first like half of this book I was really not into for a few different reasons. Like I just mentioned with the last book, I really don't mind young adult characters usually, because I kind of remember what it's like being that age and reacting impulsively and emotionally to things and just being in a different state of life. Like you have different decisions to make, all that stuff. So I understand an immature main character, but I thought this main character, Julie, was just like over the top, not dealing with this well. And I even more so can understand she just experienced this insane loss. Not that I can understand because I've been through a similar experience, because I absolutely haven't. So it's kind of hypocritical for me to say I know how a person would react, because I have no idea how I would react, let alone as a young adult. But I still feel the way she reacted to be really weird. Like it just left a lot to be desired in terms of creating a character that we were supposed to root for, because she didn't seem all that sad about it. She also didn't seem to just be shutting down. Like I can understand somebody going through this might not look like they're grieving and sad about it to other people because they just might be shutting down emotionally. But I felt like because she's our main character and we're inside her head, we still should have gotten more of those actual root thoughts that she had to have been having related to her grief, and we really didn't get that. So she was just like a blank wall, even to us as the reader. So it was very unlikable, unsure of why I was supposed to be rooting for her or what I was even supposed to be rooting for, because it was very unclear with these phone calls what was the point. They didn't seem to be talking about anything of substance or like getting any sort of closure from each other or reaching any kind of goal or anything. So I don't know, it was weird the first half of this book. Eventually, I feel like it found its steam, and I did come around towards the end to understand these characters a little bit more as people and like their personalities and why they were a good fit for each other and why they liked each other. But ultimately, I think I can only give it 3 stars. Even that feels a little generous, but I also think I'm giving that with the caveat of I think this book is best suited for young adult audiences. And I say that because it is clearly marketed as a young adult book, but I do think there's a difference between young adult books that adults can still fully enjoy and get everything out of, and it's just as impactful for, and then young adult books that really are more catered towards a younger audience and will be most of the time more impactful for someone younger who maybe hasn't had to deal with a loss like this or hasn't read other extremely emotional, adult books on similar topics. I hope that that doesn't come off as me bashing the book. That's just how I feel after having this not completely work for me, but seeing why it's still important as a book and hopefully trying to guide it towards someone who might enjoy it more than I did. But again, at the end of the day, not really a romance, much more about letting go of someone you love than it is about like falling in love. So not sure that it really fits with this video, but I already included it, so it is what it is. So now we are on to the final book of this video. We've got Magic Hour by Chris and Hannah. And because I have no idea what this is about, let's read the synopsis together.
In the rugged Pacific Northwest lies the Olympic National Forest, nearly 9 acres of impenetrable darkness and impossible beauty. From deep within this old-growth forest, a 6-year-old girl appears. Speechless and alone, she offers no clue as to her identity and no hint of her past. Having retreated to her Western Washington hometown after a scandal left her career in ruins, child psychiatrist Dr. Julia Cates is determined to free extraordinary little girl she calls Alice from a prison of unimaginable fear and isolation. To reach her, Julia must discover the truth about Alice's past, although doing so requires help from Julia's estranged sister, a local police officer.
To be completely honest, this does not sound like a romance at all. So very confused about that. Change of plans, you guys. It is Monday morning. The very next morning, I was going to start Magic Hour this morning and I realized I do not have an audiobook copy of this book. So I'm not going to read it. I'm not convinced it's even a romance to begin with, and because I don't have the audio, I just don't feel super motivated to pick it up at this moment. And that's not because I can't read books only physically. The last 2 books that I just read, I didn't have audio for, so I enjoy and totally can read books physically. However, I also love audiobooks. And especially during the week when I'm working and can listen to audiobooks as I'm doing mindless work tasks, I do rely on audiobooks throughout the week to keep me, churning out books. So I am going to replace the last book in this video with a new release romance that I've been seeing a lot of buzz about recently. I'm going to read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I have heard Olivia from Liv's Library read this book and rave about it. And then just last night I was on Sprints on Keisha's channel, or I was watching Sprints on Keisha's channel. She had Kendall and Gabby on there, and Gabby from Gabbing About Books was reading this book too, and I think she was really liking it. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a try. I just downloaded it on Libro. I spent a full credit on it. And all I know about this one is I believe it's about a ghostwriter that also can communicate with actual ghosts or something like that. I do believe there's a paranormal element to this book, so I'm going in with that in mind. I'm coming to learn about myself that I'm okay with paranormal elements in books, but usually as long as I know that that is going to be a big part of the book before I start reading it. So I'm gonna give it a chance. Other than that, I have no idea what romance tropes this contains or anything like that. So I will let you know as I get into it. Hopefully we'll make a good chunk of the way through today, and I'll give you my update on this as my new final book. All right, it's a bit later in the day. I've been listening to The Dead Romantics whenever I get a chance, and I'm 12% in. So I thought I'd give a little introductory update. I'm enjoying this book so far, still definitely getting the setup of it, so much more to come. But the basic premise so far is that we are following the main character who is a ghostwriter for a super well-known romance author. Same level as Danielle Steele, Nicholas Sparks, that level of famous, but she's a ghostwriter, so nobody knows that she is the author of these books, and she's now at a point in her writing career where she's kind of struggling because she wants to shift away from romance or from writing romance, but she can't do that because she's locked into this very well-known romance author's name. So she's dealing with that and some creative struggles because her deadline is rapidly approaching for when she has to submit her next draft. But she also has a new book editor that she's working with, and apparently he's super hot and she has a big crush on him. So I'm not sure if that is going to be the love interest and if it's going to be like kind of a taboo author and editor romance, but also a little bit of mistaken identity because he doesn't know she's actually the ghostwriter. At their first meeting, he thinks that she is this famous author's assistant. So there might be something there with the correspondence of the editor, you know, not knowing who she really is and thinking he's talking to the author, or thinking he's talking to the assistant, but he's really talking to the author. You know what I mean? That might come into play, I'm assuming. And then apparently there's also this element of our main character can talk to ghosts. And it seems like it's a family thing because it sounds like their family owns a funeral home. She was on the phone with her dad after a funeral and he was talking about talking to the ghost of the funeral that was happening. And she's mentioned that she also has that ability, but she doesn't like talking to ghosts. So she likes living in New York City because when she sees a ghost, she can just act like she doesn't see them and kind of let them get lost in like the hustle and bustle of New York City. But I'm obviously assuming that that also comes into play later in the story. So I'm very interested to continue listening and see where this goes from here, see how all of this kind of comes together into the plot, and eventually see the romance start to develop. So I'll check back in later, but just wanted to say so far so good. And this book is very unique so far, so I'm liking it. Okay, I just finished my last romance for this video. I finished The Dead Romantics and I really enjoyed it. There were some twists there at the beginning of the story because where it ended up going is definitely different from what I initially pitched, and I had a really fun time letting that unfold and not knowing exactly what this story was. So I don't want to give too many details. I just want to say that this is a very like heartwarming, kind of cheesy rom-com type book. There are some deeper elements because it does deal with grief and death, but in my opinion, it never got too heavy with those topics. It was much more about like fun ability to see ghosts and like the humor in that. And then of course a romance that is very different from any other romance I've read. There were times when it was a bit too cheesy for my personal preference, like it was a small town and apparently their mayor is a dog because they elected a dog as the mayor, and then he just kept appearing throughout the book and she would call him the mayor, and like that's just a little too much for my pet not loving heart. And I know that's going to offend pet people, so I'm sorry, but that's just a little too much for me. But otherwise the book kind of reminded me of Book Lovers by Emily Henry because it is about people in the book world and the publishing world, and our main character goes home to her hometown, which is like a small, cute little quaint town. I didn't love Book Lovers because I don't love that trope, and so this one also didn't like super work for me, but that's not to say that I didn't enjoy the story. I had a fun time listening to it. The audiobook narrator was really good. Overall, I'm glad I read it. I think I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Probably would be like 3.5 if I did half stars. So I definitely enjoyed it. Not a new favorite, but fully enjoyed it and would recommend it to people who think like a ghost love story could be something they're interested in. So with that, 6 books in I think 8 days, which is really good for me, and I'm so impressed with how much I just generally enjoyed the romance genre this week. I do think I will continue to sprinkle in romance to my regular reading routine now. I do think I have to be a little picky about the types of romances I pick up because I still don't think the general light, fluffy, cheesy romances are my perfect romances. So I don't want to waste a bunch of time picking those up if they're probably not going to do anything for me. But if there continue to be romances that everybody raves about, and especially if they're a certain trope that I've come to find that I enjoy, or if people are telling me it's, you know, an emotional romance or whatever, then I will not hesitate to pick it up. So a summary of my enjoyment of the books that I read and my order of recommendations, I guess. At the bottom, I've got Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, 2 stars. Then I think I would put You've Reached Sam, just because it was a little bit surface level for me. I wanted more, but would recommend it to a young adult audience. Then I would probably put The Dead Romantics, because I also gave that one 3 stars. So I did enjoy it more than You've Reached Sam, but didn't quite hit the 4-star mark for me. Then I think I'm gonna put You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. Next was a 4-star, so I really enjoyed it, but had a few preference issues with it. Then I think I would put Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. This was such a pleasant surprise. I definitely want to purchase a physical copy of that book so that I can have it. And then definitely my favorite book of this whole video is Every Summer After. Completely worth the hype, gave it 4 stars, and really, really enjoyed it. So that's my final ranking of all the books. Please let me know after all of this if you have any romance recommendations, especially with childhood friends to lovers, or second chance romances, or emotional romances that really go there and hit you hard, or romances that just do something unique that you've never read before and that you want more people to read. Let me know your recommendations, because I will definitely, like I said, be keeping an eye out and reading more romance in the future. So with all of that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.